The envelope had been sitting on my kitchen counter for 11 days. I know the exact number because I counted them. Every morning I'd come to stairs, make my coffee, and just look at it. I never moved it, never opened it, just left it there between the fruit bowl and the paper towel holder, like it was something ordinary. Like it wasn't the thing that was going to end one version of my life and start another. My mother-in-law had handed it to me herself, pressed it into my hands with both of hers, the way she did when she wanted you to know something was serious. She looked me straight in the eyes and said, "You need to read this when you're ready, not before." Then she turned around and walked back to her car, and I stood on my front porch watching her drive away, holding this envelope like it was a hand grenade with the pin already pulled. I still don't know how she knew what was coming, but she did. My husband, I'll call him my husband, because that's what he was, legally at the time, had been pulling away for months. I told myself it was work stress. He'd taken on a new client, a commercial real estate firm, and the hours were brutal. Some nights he didn't come home until midnight. Some nights he texted that he was just going to crash at the office, easier than the drive. I believed him because I wanted to believe him. Because the alternative was something I wasn't ready to look at. We'd been married for 6 years. Together for 9. I was 31 when we got married, which felt right. Not too young, not rushing anything. We bought our house the year after the wedding, a 4-bedroom Craftsman in a neighborhood we both loved, with original hardwood floors and a kitchen that needed work, but had good bones. We put everything into that house. Weekends refinishing cabinets, arguing over paint swatches, learning, together, how to be people who own something real. His parents helped with the down payment. I want to be honest about that. $20,000 from his father, who at the time seemed like the most generous man I'd ever met. He had this big laugh and called me kiddo, and made me feel, from the very first dinner, like I'd been absorbed into something warm and solid. A real family, the kind I'd always wanted. My own family is complicated. My mom passed when I was 19, breast cancer, faster than anyone expected. My dad remarried within 2 years, moved to Phoenix with his new wife, and we talk maybe 4 times a year. I have a younger sister, Priya, who I'm close with, but she lives in Portland and our relationship is mostly texts and once-a-year visits. What I'm saying is that when I married into that family, I wasn't just gaining a husband, I was gaining everything that came with him. The Sunday dinners, the holiday traditions, the feeling of belonging somewhere. His father, I had always called him by his first name Raymond, the way he insisted, was the center of all of it, the gravitational pull. He was a self-made man in the truest sense. Grew up in rural Georgia with nothing, built a contracting business from the ground up, sold it for more money than I can say out loud without my voice doing something weird. He owned several properties outright. He had opinions about everything, and delivered them like they were scripture, and somehow inexplicably, you almost always agreed with him by the end. I admired him. I genuinely did. That matters, I think. It matters that I'm not telling you a story about a villain I always saw coming. I'm telling you about a man I loved, who turned out to be capable of something I never would have predicted. The first sign was so small I almost missed it. It was Thanksgiving, 2 years ago. We were all at Raymond's house, his sprawling brick colonial in a suburb about 40 minutes outside the city. His second wife, my husband's stepmother Connie, had been cooking for 2 days. The table was beautiful. Everything was fine on the surface, the way things can be fine on the surface for a very long time. After dinner, when the men had moved to the living room and the women were doing that thing where we all end up in the kitchen together, even though nobody planned it that way, Raymond said something to my husband. I wasn't in the room. I only heard about it later, secondhand, from Connie, who whispered it to me in the driveway while we were putting leftovers in my car. Raymond had told my husband that it was time to think seriously about protecting the family assets. Connie didn't say more than that. She looked uncomfortable even saying that much. I thanked her, drove home, and spent the next hour convincing myself it meant nothing. Estate planning. Reasonable stuff. Everybody does it eventually. I should have asked more questions. The pulling away started around that time. Looking back now with the clarity I didn't have then, I can trace it almost exactly. January, my husband started handling all the mail himself. February, he opened a separate savings account. He mentioned it casually, said it was for a project I didn't push. March, the late nights began. April, May, the texture of our marriage changed in ways I couldn't name but could feel in my body, the way you feel a shift in weather before the sky shows it. By June, I had stopped sleeping well. I'd lie there next to him and stare at the ceiling and run inventories in my head. What was wrong? What had I done? What was happening to us? And come up with nothing solid to hold on to. The envelope arrived in July. 11 days before I opened it, when I finally did, it was a Tuesday night. He was at his client dinner. I'd made pasta, eaten it alone, washed the pot, and then stood at the counter looking at that envelope and thought, enough. Whatever is in here, it's less terrible than not knowing. Inside were 3 things. A letter from Connie, handwritten, 2 pages. A copy of a document I didn't immediately understand. And a business card for a family law attorney with a sticky note on it in Connie's handwriting. Call her. She's good. She's already expecting to hear from you. I read the letter first. Connie was careful with her words, the way people are, when they've thought very hard about what they're going to say. She told me she loved me like a daughter. She told me she was ashamed of what she was about to tell me. She told me that she had tried, for months, to talk Raymond out of it, and that she had failed, and that her conscience would not let her stay silent anymore. Raymond had decided that the marriage was not going to last. I don't know how he arrived at this conclusion, whether my husband had confided something to him, or whether Raymond had simply decided on his own based on evidence I wasn't privy to. But he had decided, and once Raymond decided something, he moved. The document was a quitclaim deed. My name was not on the mortgage of our house. I'd known that, technically. When we bought, we'd structured it a certain way for reasons that had seemed reasonable at the time, something about my student loan debt affecting our rate. My husband has explained it. I had agreed. We had moved on. I had never thought about it again, because why would I? We were married. What was his was mine. That's how marriage works. Except, Raymond had quietly transferred the property into an LLC that my husband controlled entirely. The paperwork had been completed in April. It was completely legal. And it meant that in any divorce proceeding, the house would likely be considered a business asset rather than marital property, which complicated everything. I sat at that counter for a long time. I didn't cry right away. That surprised me later when I thought back on it. I'd expected myself to fall apart, but instead I just felt this strange cold stillness, like the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees and my whole body adjusted to it. Then I picked up the business card and I called the attorney's office and left a message, and I went to bed. That was a Tuesday. By Friday I had met with the attorney. Her name was Sandra, and she was the most composed human being I have ever encountered in my life, and I understood my situation in full. It was not good, but it was not hopeless. There were things that could be done, and we were going to do them, quickly and quietly, before anyone knew I knew anything at all. I want to be clear about something. I am not a vindictive person by nature. I'm not someone who plans things out in elaborate detail, or thinks 3 steps ahead. What I am is someone who grew up watching my mother handle every terrible thing life handed her with a kind of quiet, methodical practicality. And apparently, when my back is truly against the wall, I am my mother's daughter in ways I hadn't known until that moment. The following weeks were the strangest of my life. I went to work. I came home. I made dinner. I talked to my husband about ordinary things, whose turn it was to call the plumber about the bathroom sink, whether we should get the car serviced before or after the Labor Day weekend trip we were supposedly still taking. I smiled at the right moments. I said I love you back when you said it to me, and I mean this when I say it. I wasn't performing. Part of me still did love him. Parts of us were still real, even then. That's the thing nobody tells you about the end of a marriage. It's not a clean line. It's a blur, and you're living in it, and you still feel everything even as you're also preparing to leave. Sandra had explained my options with a calm that I found enormously stabilizing. The LLC transfer, while legal, had some vulnerabilities. Specifically, the timing of it, April, while we were still legally married, without my knowledge or consent, was potentially actionable. There were also questions about marital waste, about the original down payment, and how it had been characterized in our taxes over the years. About several other things I am not going to detail here, because frankly it's complicated, and also Sandra told me not to. What I can tell you is that I did not do anything dramatic or illegal. I did not move money around or hide assets or do anything that would give anyone ammunition against me. What I did was document everything, make copies of everything, and follow Sandra's instructions precisely. It took about 7 weeks of very careful, very quiet work. During those 7 weeks, Raymond called me twice, just to chat, the way he used to. Asking about work, telling me about a property he was looking at, making me laugh with some story about a contractor who'd messed up a renovation. Both times I talked to him like everything was fine. I had loved this man. Part of me grieved him even while I was talking to him, even while I knew what he'd done. That grief sat in my chest like a stone the whole time. My husband didn't know I knew. I'm almost certain of that. There was no shift in his behavior toward me, no extra guilt in his eyes. He was just tired, distracted, pulling away, the same as he'd been for months. I wonder sometimes if he even knew how far his father had taken things. I wonder if Raymond had acted somewhat unilaterally, the way he did with everything else in his life. I don't know. I'll probably never know. The Sunday it finally came apart, we were at Raymond's house for his birthday dinner. Connie had made his favorite, pot roast, and there was a lemon cake from the bakery he liked. And the whole family was there. My brother-in-law and his wife, their kids running around. The usual warmth and noise that had always made me feel like I'd won something just by being included in it. After dinner, Raymond pulled my husband aside. I watched it from across the room. They went out to the back porch together, and Raymond had his hand on my husband's shoulder the way he did when he was delivering important information, and something in my husband's face shifted. He nodded slowly a few times. When they came back in, he didn't look at me right away. I didn't know exactly what had been said, but I knew that whatever plan had been in motion was now accelerating. I knew that the timeline I was working against had just shortened. On the drive home, my husband was quiet. I talked about the dinner, how good the pot roast was, how much the kids had grown, and he gave short answers and looked out the window. 15 minutes from our house, he said, "I think we need to talk when we get home." "Okay," I said. "About us," he said. "I know," I said. He looked at me then, and I think something in my voice surprised him. I wasn't asking what he meant. I wasn't alarmed. I was just calm. He couldn't have known what that calm meant, but something about it unsettled him. "You know," he said. "I know we need to talk," I said, which was true. We got home. I put my bag down on the kitchen counter, right next to where that envelope had sat for 11 days, though he didn't know anything about that, and I turned to face him. He told me he thought the marriage was over. He said it had been over for a while and he was sorry. He said he'd been trying to find the right moment, which was not true. What he'd been doing was waiting until the legal groundwork was finished, but I let him have the version he needed to tell himself. I'm not here to destroy him. I never wanted that. What I said was, "I think you're right. I think it's been over for a while too." He blinked. That wasn't the response he'd prepared for. "I want to handle this as adults," I said. "I've already talked to an attorney." The silence that followed was a very specific kind of silence. The kind that means the other person has just realized they are behind in a game they thought they were winning. He started. "I've been prepared for this," I said. "I think it's better for both of us if we keep this clean and fair. But I do need it to be fair." He called his father that night. I heard him in the bedroom, his voice low, and then not low, and then raised in a way I hadn't heard from him in our 9 years together. I sat on the couch with a cup of tea and listened to the sounds of things falling apart on a timeline that was no longer his father's to control. The next few months are not the part of this story I'm going to tell in detail, partly for legal reasons and partly because they are mine, and I'm not ready to put all of it out into the world. What I will tell you is this. The LLC did not protect what Raymond thought it would protect. The marital waste argument was compelling enough that my husband's attorney advised him. I only know this because he told me afterward, one of the few honest conversations we had in those months, that fighting it would cost more than settling fairly. We settled fairly. I kept the house. That's not a detail I take any satisfaction in, actually, because the house without the marriage is just a building. But I fought to keep it because I had put 9 years into it. And because I was not going to let Raymond's maneuvering strip me of something I had earned with my own hands, and my own labor, and my own love. Raymond did not speak to me directly through any of it. Not once. He had his attorney communicate with mine. Very formal. Very clean. Nothing like the man who used to call me kiddo and make me feel like I belonged somewhere. Connie texted me twice during those months. Once to ask if I was okay, once to tell me she was sorry. I told her both times that I was grateful. I meant it. Whatever she risked by warning me, she didn't have to risk it. She chose to. Priya flew out from Portland for a week in October. She slept on the air mattress in the guest room, and we watched bad movies, and she made me eat actual meals, and she held my hand when I cried, which was mostly late at night when the house felt too big and too quiet. She didn't say "I told you so," even though she had gently once, a long time ago, said something about Raymond that I hadn't wanted to hear. That's the thing about sisters who actually love you. They don't cash in old predictions. They just show up. I am still in the house. It's mine now, officially, entirely. I refinished the back deck by myself last spring. YouTube tutorials and 2 weekends and a lot of sore muscles, and I stood on it afterward in the early evening light and felt something I didn't have a name for. Not happiness. Exactly. Not yet. Something quieter. Something that felt like the beginning of solid ground. I don't think about Raymond the way I thought I would. I expected anger to be the dominant thing, and it's there, but it's not what leads anymore. What leads is something closer to grief. Grief for the man I thought he was. Grief for the family I thought I'd found. Grief for the particular kind of belonging that I had wanted so much, that I didn't ask the questions I should have asked, and that I had to lose almost everything to learn to trust my own instincts about. He loved his son. I believe that. I believe he thought he was protecting something. I think he made a calculation about who I was and what I was worth to his family, and the calculation was cold and wrong, and it cost all of us something we can't get back. I don't know what he thought would happen. That I would just leave quietly? That I wouldn't have anyone in my corner? That I was someone who could be moved around like a piece on a board without noticing? I am someone who noticed. Before I go, and I want to ask you something first, because some of you watching this have been there. Maybe not exactly there, but close enough that you know the particular quality of that stillness I described, sitting at a counter with a document that changes everything. Maybe it was a parent. Maybe it was a spouse. Maybe it was someone else you trusted completely. What do you do when you realize the family you loved was never completely what you thought it was? Leave me your answer in the comments. I read them. I mean that. My husband and I are not in contact. I don't know if we'll ever have a real conversation again. There are moments, and I know this sounds strange, where I miss him specifically, the person I fell in love with before everything got so complicated and so calculated. I think he was a good person who let someone else do his leaving for him. That's its own kind of sad. Raymond I don't miss. I miss who I believed he was. Those are different things. What I have now is a house with a deck I built myself, a sister who showed up when it mattered, an attorney who fought for me like I was worth fighting for, and a stepmother-in-law who pressed an envelope into my hands and trusted me to know when I was ready. I never wanted the house. Not really. What I wanted was to be someone that a family was glad to keep, to be chosen, to belong somewhere permanent. I know now that the only person who could ever give me that was me. It took losing almost everything to understand that. I wish it hadn't. But here I am, standing on my own deck, in my own light, learning what it means to build something that no one can take.